Welcome back to another wonderful webinar with Rabbi Pinchas Winston. This is entitled The Making of a Leader. For more information about Rabbi Winston, about his amazing works, all the books he's written, his seminars, his webinars, all of the things that he's done, you can go to his website, which can be found at 36, spelled out, 36.org. We highly recommend that you go there and check out his website. This is also being sponsored by the Bring Them Home Project. The way to get to the Bring Them Home Project, so you can get there multiple ways. One of them, easiest ways, I'm just finding out now that I'm getting notices that I have been removed from the Facebook stream, unfortunately, because I have been banned from them. But we are still live streaming now on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Twitch for the time being until we're banned from those. So we'll keep posted. For the Bring Them Home Project, which is a project which is mission statement is in order to inform and educate Jews around the world the importance of living in Eretz Israel today. We encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/Israel Torah. And over there, you will be able to subscribe and get notifications of webinars like this one that we are doing. And without further ado, Rabbi Winston.
Thank you. I appreciate the optimism, calling it a wonderful shiur in advance. I sure hope that it fulfills that perspective in the end. And you wonder how much longer we could even do things like this before they start to attack things like the internet itself and make it difficult to communicate anything. The Talmud says that one of the signs of Mashiach is imminent is that truth will be missing from the world. And it doesn't make a difference if people are misguided, if people are actually evil, but whatever it is, the truth itself will be missing from the world. And when I saw this probably 30 times, who knows how many times over the years, and you wonder what that means. People lie. They've been lying for a long time. Everyone lies at some point in time, but it's hard not to not lie at some point in time even for good reasons. And but the fact that so many people today are obsessed with stamping out any semblance of God's truth from the world because they can't handle it. They can't fit it into their box. They can't fit into their lifestyle. In brief, the world has always been affected by the Yetzer Hara. There's sometimes when it's stronger, there's other times when it's not so strong. But clearly, we are living in a time right now where the Yetzer Hara has tremendous shlita, tremendous power to control so much, and it was building up over the longest time, and we sort of didn't pay attention to it because we never realized how bad things could actually get. Some people did project back early as 2000, maybe perhaps even a little bit earlier, but certainly a little bit after that, where things might be going. But who knew? Who thought? What could possibly go wrong? Everything was going so well, and everything has changed so quickly. But Kabbalistically, there's nothing new under the sun, as King Solomon wrote and said, and it's been used who knows how many times after that. Man's the same, the world's pretty much the same, the clothing changes, the expression of the ideas perhaps are just over time based upon the evolution and development of history. But everything's happening exactly as it's happened before in the past. You go back to 1930 Germany, very similar was going on. You go back to Russia, you go back to the Roman times and all that. Everybody knows that if you want to be able to accomplish your agenda, then you have to control the media. And the media is key to all this because people are waiting to be told what to think. You have individuals who are thinkers, and they do it for themselves, and they investigate, they check things out, and they don't just take things for granted. But the masses of people, for the most part, they're involved in their own personal lives. They don't want to have to think too much about things necessarily, and they're certainly open and willing to be taught. We go to school and take it for granted that what we're being taught is in fact the truth. We listen to the television news stations, and we watch or read the magazines and the newspapers and online outlets and all that, and we take it for granted that what's being said. Why would a person lie? Why would they change it like that? Just one thing. It's very simple. That you need three things to be able to have true free will. Not that you're not making choices. People are making choices all the time. The question is who's making the choice. because we have two components. We have ourselves, we have our soul, the essence of who we are, as explained by Kabbalah and has been accepted for the longest time. And then we have the Yetzer Hara, which is it's anthropomorphized in Gan Eden as the snake. I mean, he was in that form, but it really wasn't the snake itself. The snake was just a vehicle for the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and then basically it was put into man, became part of us, and so we have a visitor, we have a guest living in our being, but he acts like the balabais, the Arizal says. He acts like the owner of the house. And if you're not aware of that, then basically you hear a voice inside. You just assume it's your voice telling you what to do, and you follow it. But there are three things. It's very important to know. If you really, 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 really like the idea of free will. I mean, we talk about free speech and freedom, but freedom of speech doesn't necessarily just mean you can say whatever you want. Because I'll give you an example. Okay, the Talmud is a halacha. There's a halacha that a person really can't get divorced against his will, and yet if somebody really should give a get, should get divorced from somebody, and he's not doing it, so then in the times of the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, they could compel him, they could force him to actually go ahead and give the get. And the question is, how is that possible? If he has to have the will to do it, how is compelling him to do it, fulfilling the halacha? So the Talmud says, because he really wants to do it. He wants to do the right thing. We're all hardwired, in essence, to do the right thing, to live by truth, to accept truth, to acknowledge truth, to pursue it. But it's just that we have this thing called the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, meaning that we have, you can call it instinct sometimes, but it's basically a desire for comfort. It's a desire for the easier path. It's a desire to enjoy this world with abandon, as if there's nothing else coming up after it, because that's what the body likes. That's what the Yetzer Hara pursues. So in order to overcome it, to actually have free will, the first thing you have to understand is, free of what? What's the, you don't have to pay for it. You're born with it. There's no service charge. Well, not yet. What's it free of? So basically, free will means free of the Yetzer Hara. It means free. It's like, you don't call it free will if a government forces you to choose something against what you want to do. So my Rosh Hashiva said it in very simple terms. Don't do what you feel like doing. Do what you want to do. And of course, isn't that the same thing? No, not at all. There's lots of times in life we want to do something, but we don't feel like doing it. So we capitulate. Now, some people can't live with that. So that's where rationalization comes in. Right? Oh, I was too tired anyhow, and probably they were closed, and anyhow, 3 times out of 5, I did exactly that. And it didn't even work out, so it wasn't the worst thing. It's like because we don't want to admit that we did the wrong thing or we went against our will, and so we make the feeling and the want come together. But in reality, the happiest, most accomplished people in the world in history are not those people who pursue what they feel like doing. The people who pursue what they want to do, and that basically comes down to what the soul wants to do. So if you don't believe in the Yetzer Hara, then basically you don't believe in the fact that you have an inclination to do the opposite of what you really, really want to do in your heart of hearts. That's a problem, and that's really a large part of the world today, and that's a large part of the world through history. The people have been pursuing their Yetzer Haras, and of course, right before you die, you might even realize this, and then of course it's too late to think about it. And the smart person, the more accomplished person, the person who really lives life, is the one who realizes it early enough. The Torah tells you about this, so you're aware of it. But if you don't accept the concept and you just say it's basically man's inner tendencies and the inner voice, you take a more Freud approach to the whole concept of those inner voices, then you get a world like today where people are just pursuing their feelings as opposed to what they really, really want, which they're not even in touch with anymore. But even that's not enough. That's not enough. In order to be able to implement that, you have to first know good and evil. Does it even exist? And if it does exist, so what is that? Where does it come from? But how are you going to get that? Because man cannot really intuit that with too much accuracy on his own. Anytime the man is operating independent of any higher authority, it's basically coming down to his or her personal opinion. Just a bunch of opinions. That's all it is. Like his opinion, her opinion, and even though some are dramatically different than our opinion, but if it's an opinion, it's an opinion. And when Hitler, Yimach Shema decided that the world should be Judenreich, every life be gone from the world, that was his opinion. It wasn't a true or false thing. He didn't have that. He didn't believe in God, at least not the way he's supposed to, as far as I know, right? And it was his opinion. So if someone says, "Well, I think the Jews should stay around, but instead we should get rid of religion," that's an opinion, and you put yourself in the same boat because it's just a bunch of opinions. The fact that someone else's opinion, their opinion is so different than your opinion, just means that they're different. Doesn't mean that you can call them evil. You can't call them bad, because what is that? Your idea of good and your idea of bad, fine. In your book, he's called bad, but who says that your book is the right book in the end? So in order to get around that problem, you have to have an objective truth. This is essential. Without an objective reality, you can't have a foil against which to compare your opinion, to know if is your opinion in fact the truth, or is it just your idea, which is based upon biases and your education and your childhood. I mean, you could be so wrong about so many different things. And think you're right, because people do that all the time. We're doing that, every one of us. Even people who live by Torah can make that mistake too. But at least if you have an objective authority, an objective level, ruler to measure your opinion against, then you have a much better chance of having an opinion that's based upon truth versus based upon sheker. So that, of course, you can call it what you want, but that's what we call God. So now just really going in reverse, so start with the proper order. In order to have free will, you must believe in God. You have to. Without belief in God, there's no objective truth. There's no such thing as true and false. All there is opinion. Not true and false. Opinion. But what you like, what you don't like. And that's not enough. You have to believe that God has communicated that objective truth to mankind, because he may know it. If we don't know it, then back to square one again. But even that's not enough. And then you have to understand there's a thing called the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, call it your instincts, call it your survival code, whatever you want to call it. But that is basically misguides people, misleads them to the point that they can actually believe they are doing good. They're doing the world right. They're everything. They're the most intelligent people, but it's really just the arrogance in the end, which is what's going to fill the gap. Because if you don't have God, you can't have humility. Period. And if you don't have humility, you only have arrogance. No matter how nice you talk, no matter how much you seem to be the nicest guy in the world, doesn't make a difference. If you don't have humility, you have arrogance. There's just no middle ground there. A little bit of arrogance and a lot of humility, or a little bit of humility and a lot of arrogance. But if you don't have any humility, then basically arrogance is going to fill the gap. And arrogance, no matter how much money, how much education, how much experience you're going to have in life, it doesn't make a difference. Arrogance will always pervert and distort your knowledge and your perspective. And many people, as I say, the road to hell is paved with good intention, because that's what happens if you allow your perspective to become only yours, as opposed to getting it from a higher reality. Why am I going through all of this? Well, but obviously it's very apropos to what's going today, what Josh began with, because we're going through very unsettling times, very difficult times, very times for lots of concern. There are people out there think that they're doing a great thing and doing a wonderful thing for society, but they're really, really, really just look at history, go all the way back from the beginning, walking down that very same path that has led to the implosion and destruction of many decent societies in the past, as much as perhaps could be expected, or even not so decent. But that was what they led to was even worse in the end. It's a cycle. It's what history happens. It happens every 70, 80, 90, whatever years, and ultimately it's really the Jewish people's problem for two reasons. One, because it's our job as a light unto nations to teach the world that there is a God. As we say in Zechariah, on that day, God will be one and his name will be one, meaning that everybody will have no doubt about the existence of God. The existence of God is simply Amalekian. The gematria of Amalek, the nation, that attacks the Jewish people by Rephidim outside, just after the man fell in the desert, and they crossed the sea, is called Amalek. And the gematria of Amalek is the same as the word Safek, which means doubt. So at the moment a person has doubt in the existence of God, that person is not necessarily Amalek themselves, but they're being affected by, they're being attacked by Amalek. And if a person goes so far as to embody that belief and try to impose it upon other people, they become Amalekian. These we're talking definitions over here. Societies rise and fall on definitions. And this is essential for understanding, because this is what is going on today in history, and that's what's going on in these parshiot. I mean, they overlap with uncanny timing, and it's very important to learn the messages. I don't know how much we can change at this point. It's been happening for some time, and basically, we didn't really pay enough attention to it when it was developing and building, and there's lots of people who think it's the best thing in the world, and you certainly can't convince them otherwise. But we'll see. And if history is any sign of how things play out, well, until now, I don't know of any time in history when things have gone this path that they have not ended in basically the destruction of society. Okay, but check it out for yourself. Don't take my word for it. You won't anyhow. But this is what we're being told in these parshas. I mean, this is Pharaoh is king of the mightiest nation on earth at the time, the most technologically developed nation at that time, most prosperous nation at that time of history, and they fall apart. They collapse. And you'll say, because God, if you believe in the story, I mean, if it's the first, believe in the Exodus story. But if you believe in the Exodus story and you still want to believe it's unique, you'll come back. Well, God stepped into history. We read the Haggadah on Pesach, and he did that. If God had simply minded his own business and stayed out of it, then maybe Egypt would have continued to prosper and be masters over the Jewish people. No, that's the whole point. No, why not? Because everything is God. God will always step into history to right things after a period of time. He'll put up with it for a little while. Unbelievably, he has incredible patience. I wish I had patience like that. But he has incredible patience. I can barely put up with things for 5 minutes sometimes. But God can wait decades and maybe even 100 years before he lowers the boom. But he's always watching. He's always paying attention, and he's always involved. There, he's directly involved as prophets. He's talking to Moshe Rabbeinu. We're talking about Makos, the plagues and all that. But he's doing all the stuff today too. It's all God. This is there's nothing that hasn't changed. That will never change. It's God's world. He made it for that reason, and he made it to operate that way. So don't think that that was the Bible and that was a long time ago and doesn't really apply today. But no, it's the same thing in different clothing, in different events, in different people, different personalities, and the scariest thing. But it's not going to scare the people because they're not aware of it. But the scariest thing is to watch who rises to the top today and what role they play, what job they take, what philosophy they pursue, and how far they push it onto other people. Because they'll come and they'll go. Yeah, listen, Pharaoh did a lot of damage until his end. And even then, he didn't end completely necessarily, according to the Medrash, but he certainly changed at that point. Until we got to the point where the Jewish people finally left Egypt and finally got to the land of Canaan 40 years later, we were ravaged. I mean, the Jewish people, first of all, lost 4/5 of their population in the plague of darkness. There were 15 people when the plague of darkness began, and only 50 million Jews when the plague of darkness began, and only 3 million Jews when it was over, because 12 million, according to the measures, died because they refused to believe that God was going to take them out. They didn't want to leave the country. They wanted to stay put, stay where they were. And they got lost in the plague of darkness. And the Gemara says a similar scenario will play out also at the end of days, at the end of history. Because anyhow, the final redemption is just the completion of the first one. We didn't finish. We left early, We couldn't hang around. Because if we stuck around too long, There'd be nothing to redeem after 400 years like we're supposed to be. In Mitzrayim, that's what God told Abraham. So they work out a calculation how it's still 400 years. But the reality is we left 190 years early. Even Rashi, who brings down that calculation, has an earlier statement that shows that we're going to be there only for 210 years. Because we had to go out at that time to save whatever was left spiritually the Jewish people. And the Ben Ish Chai points out, and that's why the end of days is also called Ketz Yamim. Ketz Yamim literally means end of days, but the word Ketz is Kuf Tzadi, which is 100 plus 90, which is 190 altogether in Gematria. And he says the reason for that is to tell you that when we finally leave this last exile for good, there's no more exiles after that, that will be finally the completion of the 190 years we were supposed to be in Egypt, but we left early instead. It's like a mortgage payment. You can't, the economy falls off. You can't make the payments the way you used to. You go to the bank and you plead for mercy, and they stretch it out over a longer period of time. It doesn't really happen in most banks, but that's what God did. He has more rachmanis than most bank managers do. And he says, okay, so instead we'll take the 190 years and we'll separate it out over the course of thousands of years until Mashiach finally comes. So there's only been one exile, and that's the Egyptian exile. And everything else is, but you'll tell me, we went to Babylonia. That wasn't Egypt. And that was conquered by the Medes, and then came the Greeks. And so like, how's it? No, well, they're all subsets. Each one of those exiles was just to finish off an aspect of the Egyptian exile that we didn't go through, we didn't fix up because we couldn't. We couldn't stay long enough to do that. And then finally, the redemptions are all parts of that final redemption. But when Mashiach finally comes, who will be Moshe Rabbeinu, when he finally comes back again to finish the job he began back there, the verse says it'd be like leave the time that we actually left Egypt, right? So then, finally, that will be the completion of the redemption. And that's why God only mentions one exile and one redemption to Abraham in the Bris Ben and Besarim, the pact of the halves. Doesn't mention the other ones, not because he left them out, not because there's a footnote, because there really is only one, and for very important Kabbalistic reasons, which I'm not going to go into right now. But that's why, in the context of that, all of this is taking place. And I may have mentioned before in the past that it is a very fascinating footnote in history that we began in a place called Mitzrayim, which literally means the boundary 50, right? Meitzer is a boundary, Yam is Yud Mem, has a gematria of 50, and basically it alludes to the 50 gates of understanding, the Nin Shari Bina. It's also a Kabbalistic discussion, which we're not going to go into right now, but that's what Mitzrayim was. And here we are, lo and behold, at the end of history, and where is the other half of the Jewish population? More or less in a place called the United States of America, the boundaried states of America. It's not called, America as much. United States of America. How many states are there? 50 states. 50 boundaried states. And is that a coincidence? Well, we don't believe in coincidence. Is it as meaningful as I'm making it out to be? I believe so. Do you? It's up to you. We'll find out. But there's no such thing as coincidence. And certainly it's hugely ironic. It's all one hemshech, all one continuation. So you can expect history to repeat itself at the end. And what's going on? There's all modern day technology, and but it's all part of the same thing. And if you know how to look, you can see how it is. But the main focus tonight is not so much that, as it is another particular point that's also hugely important because it talks to all of us, but only affects a few of us in the end. It's interesting because the book of Exodus, Shmos, right, is about the redemption of the Jewish people, but there's not much to do with the Jewish people. I mean, obviously they're there, and Moshe goes to them, and they're taken out, and there's references to them. But if you stand back and you look at the story, really, in a sense, the story is about two people primarily. One of them is Moshe Rabbeinu from a very early state. I mean, he starts off with Pharaoh with his decrees, but boom, right away, someone from the house of Levi takes a daughter from the house of Levi, and they get remarried because they were husband and wife before, and they have Moshe Rabbeinu, and he becomes the leader, so really Sefer Shmos and almost the rest of the Chumash for the most part is about his development as a leader and vis-a-vis the nation, but it's about him. And in the beginning, it's also about somebody else, and that is Pharaoh. He's a major player in this story. So we got two leaders facing off against each other. One is going to survive, and one's not going to survive in the end. But they're both leaders. And the question is, is this just an incidental point, or is this one of the main points of the Chumash? And if you look at Jewish history, you will find that Jewish history, for the most part, is not about the masses, not about the nation as a whole, which you really can't seem to affect that much. I mean, Moshe struggled with that, even though God was talking to him and he had that staff, right? I mean, today we also have a staff, but it usually means, he's CEO and secretary and this and that. Not the same thing. Doesn't, that's less powerful, less miraculous. And in spite of all that, he struggled. But you try and change the masses. I know from myself personally that when I first came up with this realization that it's no longer to each his own, that you want to live in Eretz Yisrael, great. You don't want to, fine. It's also good to, as long as you're living by Torah, wherever you're in the world. Then I began to look at different sources and put together a timeline and realize that this is the time we have to start coming home. And there really is, no real good reason. I mean, there are halachic reasons to stay where you are, but certainly to not have a desire to be here, at the very least, if not actually come here. We're at the end of history. This is the time to move back for so many different reasons. Again, some of them Kabbalistic, but some of them just historical reasons. As we're going to find out, as we are finding out, and it's starting to evolve and go in that direction. You'll see, not too long from now, people will start realizing that, oops, we probably should have, got this thing moving in progress a lot earlier. Unfortunately, we realize this thing's too late. But I thought, well, let's start talking to people. Let's start writing. I went on speaking trips, and I started writing books. And I had a website to promote the concept of Aliyah, going back to 2004. And I was very disappointed. I was disappointed because as much as I thought I was making a lot of sense, no dollars, but some sense, that I would be able to, impress upon people, and I would start seeing mass Aliyah. That was very naive, very, innocent in those days. And there was a response. Some people did take to the message. You have to understand, in the beginning, back then, even though it was after 9/11, still people didn't feel, any threat to being a Jew living in Canada, America, England, things like that. That didn't come until a little bit later on. Anyhow, to make a long story short, I began to realize, especially it coincided with some research I was doing, that history is not really about the masses, but mostly about individuals. Jewish history, maybe even secular history too, but certainly Jewish history. The masses are no less important, of course. Chas v'chalila, person's a person. He's like, we don't know who's important and how important in God's eyes. But when it comes to a lot of people, they don't want to know. They don't want to hear. They're not interested in change. They're not interested in movement. They're interested in the status quo. For so many people, these elections were not about who's the better person necessarily, but it's more about who's going to guarantee that we can maintain the status quo of being a Jew living in the diaspora, which we've been enjoying for so long until now. Who's going to make that, who's going to upset that? And I would talk and go on speaking trips, and people would argue, and I would say, well, here are the facts, and they just give me arguments, and I'd say, well, prove me wrong, and they couldn't prove me wrong, and because I was bringing sources, and they didn't have the sources, they just came with hopes and feelings, things like that, and I came to realize, kind of the hard way, that the masses really, that's God's business. He's the only one who can affect so many people and so quickly and change it. You see, in the parsha coming up, he's the only one. And the truth is, by the way, as we said before, he didn't get everybody. Only 1/5 left Mitzrayim with Moshe Rabbeinu, 4/5 stayed behind. So they got knocked out of the picture completely. And even that 1/5, most of them died in the desert, never made it there's Canaan in the end. They were just a vehicle to get out. But then after that, their children were the ones who eventually went there to Israel. So what are we talking about here? So then what is Jewish history about? So there are individuals. There are people out there who are leaders. Now, when I say leaders, I don't mean necessarily they stand up on a hill and put their hands up and say, listen to me, follow me, I know what to do. You can be a leader by having so little contact with anybody else in the world. You're a leader in the way you think. You're a leader in the way you approach reality. You approach truth. That you don't suffer from cognitive dissonance, where you block out things because they're uncomfortable. You just try to maintain the status quo. You want to know what God thinks and what he thinks about you and what he wants you to do. And you're prepared to follow him wherever he takes you, for whatever reason. That's a Jewish leader. And there are not tons of people like that, but there are people out there who may not even be aware of it yet, but you can talk to them. There's a very famous story, I think it was Rav Weissmandel, who after the Holocaust went to try to find a lot of the Jewish children that had been left with Christians and who the church and all that, to save their kids because the parents got shipped off to camps. And they just wanted to save their children. And they were so desperate, that's the only thing that they could do. And these children were taken in. And not even necessarily for nefarious reasons, but they didn't get Jewish education, and they were very small, most of them, and probably had very little memory of what it meant to be Jewish, if at all. They grew up at a very difficult time to even be Jewish. And left alone, they probably would have been adopted and raised by Christians and maybe never know that they're ever Jewish in the first place. So Rav Weissman, after the war, decided to go around, or whoever it was, to find some of these children, as many as possible. How are you going to do it? There were no records, for the most part. So all he could do, it was kind of brilliant in a sense, but it was really relying upon divine providence. All you could really do is you could go into a church if you had permission, have the children gathered before you, and he would say the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And if a child responded to that, now there were some kids who never heard it, so they couldn't respond to it, unless God performed some miracle where their soul responded. But assuming that was not the case necessarily, the ones who responded probably heard it, they recognized something, it clicked somewhere in their mind, and they would do the research and find that this child came from a Jewish family, and bring that child and have him adopted by perhaps relatives or even another Jewish family. And he saved a lot of kids that way, a lot of Jewish children that way. So in a sense, that's what God's doing all the time. And that's what people who try to influence others are doing as well. You don't know who you're going to affect. You talk to a crowd of 50 people, you don't know who you're going to affect, but you have to say the words. You have to give over the ideas. And some people will stomp out and they'll be upset and they'll hate you for it and they'll think you're wrong and they'll call you nuts. And some people listen and say, I'm not comfortable with this idea, but there's something about it that rings true. And if it rings true, I got to at least know for myself, is this in fact, what it is? And if it is, then maybe I have to start reconsidering my approach to life and where I'm living, etc. And there's many people who have done that over the years who I've met personally, who did exactly that, and they're living right now in Israel, not because they plan to make Aliyah at some point in time, not because they love the land their entire life, but they just came to realize this is the place to be Jewish, especially at this stage of history. And we call these the leaders. And some people will emerge from that and actually go out and get involved, and try to promote it and get people to look at it the same way they did. And the Vilna Gaon says that anybody who does that has a spark of Mashiach ben Yosef in them. They are an aspect of the first Mashiach, which is the preparatory Mashiach from Mashiach ben David. It's a 1-2 punch, right? So they have an aspect because that's part of the role of Mashiach ben Yosef. And that's Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why the story starts off in a very unusual way. He's out there tending his sheep. We'll skip the first part for the time being. It's also important for his development. But the turning point in his career as a leader comes when he's walking, he's grazing his sheep in the land by Har Sinai, and he sees a bush that's not burning. It's burning, but it's not being consumed by the flames, which is an interesting thing. And you should know, Kabbalistically, there's a lot going on here. A lot. You want to know what it is? Take a look at Shar Psukim, or the Rizal's work on the Parsha Shvuah. If you don't speak Hebrew, there's an English translation. If you be in touch with me, I can tell you how to get in touch with that. And he speaks about it there, and it was a very important thing. It was basically about how Moshe Rabbeinu turns to address he sees something that goes against his nature and his belief. It's not just it's fascinating. A lot of people would probably run the other direction, but it was a test to see if he's prepared to leave his comfort zone for the sake of truth. And once he did that, boom, everything, boom, after that, just God talks to him and leads him. Now, he's got struggles. He has to overcome certain things, but he prevails. He always prevails in the end, right to the very end. Oh, but he doesn't go into Eretz Yisrael. That's not because of him. He prevailed there too. The problem is the Jewish people did not prevail. The masses were not yet at the level, so therefore he chose not to go in to the land, the Medrash says, to save the nation. So he prevailed the whole way through. Why? Truth. That's what mattered most to him. What he felt like doing, what he was comfortable with, that was important also to him. His wife also, 100%. His father-in-law, he was a mensch. But the truth above all. And once he became that type of a person, or he proved himself to be that kind of a person, he became the official leader of the Jewish people, not just for them, but for all time. He comes back in every generation, it says, the Zohar says, and he will be the soul inside the body of Mashiach, who's going to bring the final redemption, because he's the penultimate leader, because he's the penultimate believer and pursuer of truth. That's one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is a lot different, very different. You have Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh is a leader too. He's a leader of the mightiest nation on the face of the earth, and he stands up to challenge Moshe Rabbeinu. In the end, he becomes a broken man. He has to basically, surrender to him. But worse than that, he loses his free will. The best way to lose your free will is to become a leader. Because once you become a leader, then there's all kinds of expectations from heaven on you, and God will manipulate the world through you. I mean, you think you're doing it. You think you're the one making these decisions. God puts the leaders in power. God works through the leaders, talks to the leaders, basically, and except in Moshe Rabbeinu's case. Because if you choose to be the leader, not because you want the glory and the grandeur and all the perks and things like that, and to have the power, but because you are the only one capable of implementing truth the way God wants it to be implemented, then not only do you not lose your free will, it's expanded, it's improved and strengthened and powerful. Ad kedei kach, which means until the point where God says, you make the decrees and I'll fulfill them. Can you imagine that? God turning to a person and say, go ahead, you make the decision. I'm waiting to hear what it is. I mean, I know what it is anyhow, but I'm waiting to hear what it is. And then I will implement it, because that's the power of free will of a truth seeker in the end. But not Pharaoh, right? God says, he's not going to let you go. You're not going to get out. At the beginning, in the end, he will, because, the plague of the firstborn. But until then, he's not going to let you go. You know why? Because I am going to harden his heart. Not just once, not just twice, a bunch of times. I am going to make Pharaoh so stubborn that he is going to literally cause the destruction of his country from his stubbornness. So, right at that point, now the referee should blow the whistle. It's not fair. What is that? You mean to say that if God is not going to get involved, then Pharaoh might have said yes at the beginning and saved himself all that embarrassment, humiliation, destruction? So how is that fair? Simple. Abuse it, you lose it. Pharaoh had free will like anybody else. But as he says, Mi Hashem, not because he doesn't believe in God. Rashi says he believes in God. He believes in God who works through nature. But a God who steps into history and manipulates the events for the sake of some ultimate cause against what's natural, that was new to him. So he asked the words, Mi Hashem. Now, if you remember, I talked about the Akedah going back a long time ago. So, there's various different levels of divine parameters, but basically two primary ones. One is the level of Elohim, and one is the level of Havaya. There's what to say on all that, but that's, for now, that's enough of a discussion. And Elohim is God running the entire. There's no such thing as nature. The word Teva, which means the nature, is the same gematria Elohim, because really all nature is just consistent miracle that God does every single second. But then there's these miracles where he only does it once in a while, like putting the sea, giving of Torah on Sinai, the plagues in Mitzrayim, all that. That's like, one-off, type situations where God's to the point. You see all the points he's making to show you that I'm the God who does the stuff. I'm God of the land. I'm the God who separates between the people and the nations of the world. He's making a point with all this. Pharaoh has a choice to see it. Moshe comes in, he gives him a chance. Let me educate you. Let me tell you that there's another level of Shkacha. I'm not coming in Elohim. If it's just Elohim, I'm coming in his name, then you're right. There's nothing to talk about because you're the one who's in power and we don't have any power and we're just slaves and there's no way we can overcome you but derech teva. But if I'm coming in the name of Avaya, well, we saw with Chanukah, that's later on, but we saw the Chanukah Shir, how the Hashmonaim turned the tables on the Greeks against all the odds because that's the level of Avaya, of Hashem, the higher level of Hashgacha Pratis, where God steps in history and literally takes over in a very overt way. So Moshe tells Pharaoh about this, right? He tells him about this, but Pharaoh refuses to learn. He refuses to learn the lesson. Not interested. So then God says, "Okay, good. Not good, but good for this type of a thing right now." And now you're gonna, by the end of the discussion, you'll have your answer. Mi Hashem, you asked, you'll know what it is. But that's after Egypt has been destroyed, right down to your own son, who's the firstborn. And this struggle, right, is all self-induced by Pharaoh, all because he refused to acknowledge the reality of God in what was taking place until he had no choice. But even when it got to a point where he could have, because he already had suffered enough, God says, "No, I'm sorry. Now you're going to be my vehicle to make the point even stronger." You see, this is the most important point of life. Is that free will is a tricky issue. In some respects it's very simple and straightforward. Other respects it's very complicated. But one thing is for sure, the essence of our free will is to decide in the quiet moments, perhaps even when we're all by our lonesome, all by ourselves. No one else is watching. No one else is paying attention. But we're making life choices. Am I a mensch? Am I not a mensch? Am I going to be a responsible person? Am I going to be a person who speaks derogatory speech about other people? Am I going to be someone who uses time, wastes time? Things that just come and go. Do I take care of my body? Do I not take care of things that we literally just between us and ourselves. But they shape our attitude towards life and our role within the world. And how much more so out there in the world with other people. Do I act nice? Do I talk? Am I polite even though I don't feel like being polite? All these decisions help to shape us as individuals. They make us into containers. They make us into just like an actor who practices being a certain type of actor their entire life, or coupled to be versatile, and eventually they'll get chosen for a part that they fit. That's the important part. Because God's master plan, it's been decided from the beginning right through our generation until the very end. It may look like things are out of control. It may look like the God's not involved. It may look like, but it's all the whole story. They knew about all this technology back at the beginning of creation because it was a potential back then also. God put it into creation so it can exist later on in history to all the people who are walking on the set today. All life is a stage for sure, 100%. We're all making decisions about either we're going to be leaders or just masses, or we just take responsibility, or just let things flow. We're going to either be responsible and truth seekers, or whatever works. And then God plugged us in. And we have two examples. We have Moshe Rabbeinu, who turned away from his lifestyle, gave up the comfort of being a shepherd in his father-in-law's house with a wonderful wife and children, and he could have had the perfect life. Instead, he picked up and he went to Mitzrayim because God told him to. And he didn't want to go. You see, he argues in the beginning. He rejects it. God, in the end, he does it. Everything he's supposed to do. A great leader, a great human being, fully accomplished, fantastic free will until his dying day, his dying moment even. Pharaoh, on the other hand, what does he do? not going to change. Not interested in truth. I'm in power. I like it. It suits me. I get to do what I want, how I want, when I want. That's what I want, okay? You want to disrupt that? You want to interfere with that? You got to go. You have to go. And you certainly can't, share your opinion with anybody else, because that could be a problem for me. No way. No. So, you've got basically, Pharaoh on one end, and you have Moshe on the other end, and all of us in between both. And the question becomes, are we a Pharaoh, or are we more like a Moshe Rabbeinu? Are we kind of Pharaoh and a bit Moshe Rabbeinu? Are we a lot Moshe, a little bit Pharaoh? But we're all a combination. And the question that everybody has to ask themselves is, do I want to be a leader or just part of the masses? Because you don't get much for being part of the masses. It seems like it's simple and easy, but at the end of the day, when you have to die and face, the heavenly court and your day of judgment, they're going to look and say, so what'd you do? What'd you accomplish? And you think, well, what difference does it make? Well, you can have us behind door number 1, or you can have us behind door number 2. And you see behind door number 1 is unbelievable. It's like, wow, I wish I had known. If I had only known that, would I, too late. Not now. So the Parashiyot, and now modern history, our own day and age, is screaming out at us. What are you? A Moshe Rabbeinu or a Pharaoh? Which one do you want to be? And we have to make that choice. And when we do, God willing, it'll be the right direction, moving in the right direction at least, because that essentially is what is going on today. Not what they think is going on today, not what she thinks is going on. No, what God thinks is going today. He set up a whole scenario, the situation today, just to draw out the Moshe Rabbeinus and to show us who the pharaohs really are, just before he steps in and deals with the situation the way he's used to doing it. Shabbat Shalom.
You definitely lived up to the introduction, so an amazing webinar as usual, and we thank you. And again, we encourage all of the people watching to go to Rabbi Winston's website, which is at 36.org, where you can find his books that are for sale, as well as all of his webinars and lectures over there. And also to go to youtube.com/Israel Torah, and to make sure to subscribe and to ring the bell for notifications, so that you can get notified when these types of webinars go live. And for now, we are banned from Facebook, but we are still streaming in all the platforms that we can. I would recommend to everyone out there to make sure to connect with anyone that they feel is speaking the truth, either by email, by the websites, by all the different means which are much harder to censor than the social media, which is very easy. As we see within just a week, we have managed to have serious censorship across the board. And like the rabbi pointed out, that is part of the redemptive process that we're seeing. And things are very exciting. We're living in very exciting times. I used to say things change by day to day. Here it's changing hour to hour, minute to minute. Things are changing very, very rapidly. And we look forward to seeing what's next. And we look forward to hearing from you next week. So stay tuned in the same place, same time. Be'ezrat Hashem. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.